Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Matthew, forgive my voice. You can tell I'm just getting over the flu, can't you?
Oh, no, not really, man. You sound great.
It feels like there's a frog. I feel like there's a frog stuck in my throat. And you know, I was actually saying to somebody the other day, okay, CBD, miracle plant, why doesn't it work for flu?
Do you find that it doesn't?
Well, somebody said to me, Joe, you're wrong. It was actually a hemp grower in the state of New York said to me, he's growing with a very powerful strain of hemp with 16% CBD, which is an enormous amount. Mm-hmm. He said, actually, his biological analyst has been vaporizing it to cut his morning congestion.
I was just getting ready to say
every day, and that it's really working well. So
yeah.
I should have done it this morning before our podcast, but
mind blown, Joe. Because I was just literally getting ready to say to you that here it's been very rainy and very, very cold as of late, and I've been waking up with that morning congestion, just like throat swollen, nose swollen, kind of hard to breathe. And before I even take my first cup of coffee, I do about 400 milligrams of CBD from a concentrated oil. Sorry, that's way too much. 40 milligrams. 40 milligrams.
That sounds right. Yeah.
40 milligrams from a concentrated oil. And by the time my coffee's done, breathing clear.
Well, there you have it. There's our first health tip of the day. Vaporize some CBD if you're feeling the winter congestion come upon you.
That reminds me, I just recently came across something about an industrial hemp grower who is now shipping industrial hemp internationally. What I mean by that is like whole hemp flower. So I'm going to have to look into that. We'll have to talk about that in a future episode.
So before we get into the news, I want to tell you that this episode is an extraordinary episode because what we did is we compiled all the questions that people have sent us over the last 40 episodes, ever since we've been recording. And we put them to Dr. Sunil Aggarwal. Sunil is really one of the world's great experts in cannabinology. He's been studying it since he was a medical student. His interest was piqued, and he has never let it go. And he really does know probably more than almost anybody. So we took these 40 questions that we call Ask Me Anything, and in fact, we put them to him, and I'm going to tell you that his answers are interesting, counterintuitive, surprising, and full of depth. There is nothing glib about Sunil.
Yeah, I am such a fan of Sunil on Twitter. You can find him on Twitter at @HumanSunil, Sunil. And his feed is just a constant resource for me daily to find new articles, interesting information. So I'm super excited to hear all of his answers to our listener questions.
Yeah, he is a relentless advocate. So this is a great opportunity, and I'm really honored that he spent some time with us. So now, before we talk to Sunil, let's do some news, okay? So, the story I have to talk about first is the one that appeared in the New York Times about the smell of skunk.
I can't even, man. It's so ridiculous.
What, you can't even?
I can't even process this article. It seems so just like I don't know. Go ahead, please.
Well, you read it. I have two thoughts reading it. First of all, it's complaining about it's interviewing people in rural California.
Right, Sonoma County specifically, right? Who are
Sonoma County, where I spent my summer, about the size of the grows and the overwhelming stink of skunk. Okay, which they complain about as dead skunks and how it's really ruining people's lives and how they feel they have to wear gas masks and particle masks outside to really blunt the smell. Now I've been in very large grow facilities, hundreds of thousands of square feet. And I know the smell of cannabis can be absolutely overwhelming. So in a way, I sort of understand these people, but in another way, I read it and thinking, wait, is this another overlay of prohibition? Has somebody put this article in the media to sort of get people really roiled? What was your response to it?
Well, first off, I mean, you've been out to Sonoma, I'm sure. Are you familiar with what is called the Sonoma stench?
Well, it's about dairy. Isn't that the dairy farms?
There's these dairy farms out there. And okay, I was born and raised in Western Kansas, and there were a lot of feedlots for meat production, for dairy production, and even like pig farms, right? For like pig meat production. And
yes.
I don't know if you've ever smelled the odor of 10,000 head of dairy cattle.
Oh, it's appalling. Of course I have. I mean, it's fecal matter. It's everything. I mean, it's the food. It's the flatulence. It's the poop. It's disgusting. But cannabis doesn't have that. I mean, it doesn't come with that. But what it does come with is, obviously, it has a very strong smell. And especially if they're raising on commercial farms, there's a lot of this stuff coming up. So are you saying this is like a not in my backyard sort of response?
I feel like this is just people who want to be okay. So to lay the groundwork, they are actually suing. There is a lawsuit. An organization of populace of Sonoma County are suing the county, basically, about changing the rules about the smell. And a lot of the people who are in the production side, they're understanding of this. They're trying to organize, odor eaters inside the grow facilities to try and cut down on this. But it just seems like these people who are so, hand-wringy that they know they lost the legalization fight, that now this is just the next thing that they can grab onto to point to why it's bad.
It's possible. That's quite possible. But I have another solution here. Now, I am not a lover of the smell of skunk. I don't love the high concentrations of beta-caryophyllene and myrcene that create the smell of skunk. Okay, it's never appealed to me as a user or even aesthetically. So my suggestion is, I think these growers should be growing more sativa strains that are high in pinene and limonene.
Oh yeah, make it.
And maybe it'll smell more like a pine forest,
like the redwood forest, right?
Yeah, than a skunk forest. That's my solution. But I've always been a lover of sativa, so I am absolutely biased on that.
I just really think that it's far too much. There's a photograph in the article of a guy outside. It's like a sunny day, and he's in a paint respirator. And he's like, I can't be outside for more than half an hour because of the smell. And I'm like,
I know.
Have you ever you spend like a full day walking and you like take your shoes off, and initially you kind of get a whiff of your own sock and you're like, oh, that's really bad. But you go nose blind in like 2 minutes. So either I need to visit Sonoma County and smell this for myself, and it's just so much worse than I can ever possibly imagine that it actually is.
I am going to do that. Actually, I'm going to California for over the holidays, and I'm going to make a trip to Sonoma and inhale.
Yeah, do it, man.
And I will give us a nose witness report. Okay?
Did you see the nose?
Is that a deal?
Did you see? Yes, please do.
A nose witness report. Yes, I'm going to go up there and inhale and smell and see if the smell of skunks are everywhere. I want to talk about another news item, which is the fact that New York has finally decided to announce that it's going to legalize.
Well, we've been on this for like 6 weeks, right? We've been talking about this.
Well, we live here. It's important. I live here anyway, since now that you've moved to Germany, and it's a major step. New York is the economic engine of the Northeast.
Well, I think more than that, New York City itself is the new Rome of the Western world, right? Like all roads lead to New York. So
it is the largest black market in the world.
True,
it has to be.
True.
Right? No doubt about it, right? We were just talking, I was talking with Dr. Chin, my partner in Medical Cannabis Mentor, and she was saying that, if anybody in New York, the reason they don't go to dispensaries is because all you have to do is dial a number and somebody will show up with 2 suitcases full of product.
Oh, yeah, man.
Amazing product.
Oh, yeah.
And really be able to talk you through the variety and the benefits and the downsides of each of those products with a fair amount of expertise. She's absolutely right.
Yeah, it's like a mobile boutique dispensary system that's completely
the entire
black
city.
market.
Yeah. So the fact that they're going to legalize is really fascinating. But what's even more fascinating to me is I've been talking to some of the regulators, and they are really aiming to create a regulatory system that is the model for the entire country. They are going to have a large component of social justice. They are going to have expungement and restitution for people who've been arrested and had their lives ruined by the drug wars. So I'm really curious to see what they're going to announce come late January. It's going to be a very important, and I believe, watershed moment for the country.
Yeah, I completely agree. My only hope in this is that they do not get like the crony system, the people who run the MTA, the bridge and tunnel folks. Like, let's get some fresh, knowledgeable blood into this like on the early side of things and avoid
I'll tell you, the regulators I've spoken to are very enlightened, and I happen to know, as a matter of fact, that a few of them actually listen to this podcast. So there you go, regulators. Take this as your clarion call to do a great job and really change.
Yeah, we believe in you. You can do it.
We believe in you, indeed. Any other news that caught your attention this week?
Well, I think that it's worth a mention. Some of our own news. We are just rolled over 40 episodes of the podcast, which we're very proud of. We're getting ready to redesign our website. We're getting ready to revamp maybe even elements of the show. And Joe, you had gotten a letter from Mr. Martin Deason. That I think has some really relevant stuff to share.
I'd actually like to read it just because he says something. I'm not good at asking for things. I'm certainly not good at asking people for sponsorship and for endorsement and all that sort of stuff. But Martin says a great thing, and I'd like to read it because it's easier than me asking. He says, I wanted to drop you a note to say how goddamn great is my enjoyment of your podcast. I love it. It addresses issues far beyond weed into the pharmacology of happiness and flow and all that good stuff. And it's really superb and the cleverest thing I get to do most weeks. The direct effects on my life so far include discovering the brilliant, non-foggy, non-stony, ADD and anxiety-relieving effects of tinctures over vaping. It has changed my consumption and my working day and my peace of mind. That's a biggie. So I make them myself, and it couldn't be easier now that I bought a decarbing machine, and it saves me shitloads of money, but that's as nothing against finally finding an answer to the self-medicating unwanted side effects, which barely exist with a tincture and are so controllable. I have Dustin Sulak and the associated power of microdosing and the benefits of the 3-day weed fast, the flow and the oxytocin and all of that, the pharmacology of creativity, motivation, happiness, and fun. It's just great stuff that I don't get anywhere else. I've only listened to 10 episodes this summer, so a heartfelt thanks and encouraging double thumbs up from the Brexity Britain of yore. It's a ray of sunshine in a world gone, as ever, a little teensy bit fucking mental. So so obviously Martin is a very good writer, but I read that to, again, say that we have not till now accepted sponsorship or advertising. We have made a conscious choice to do that so we can explore things like flow states, oxytocin, the chemistry of pleasures in the brain, which are not necessarily mainstream topics, but which interest us and obviously a growing number of people who are tuning in every 2 weeks to listen to us. So if this is the kind of material that interests you, if you want to hear more of that, would you please consider supporting us on Patreon? You can do this for as little as $1 a month. You can go as high as $1,000 a month if you like. I don't ask you do this if money is an issue for you, but if you do have money for a cup of coffee at the end of the day, one of those $5 latte, whatever Supremos that you get it at your local coffee shop, you may want to consider supporting this content. It is the way of the future. We are doing this again for love, not money. And, I told you I don't feel good about asking for things, but the more I do this, maybe the better I am at asking for things. So I'm going to put it out there to you, listeners. Please consider supporting the Brave New Weed podcast.
Yeah, so what's it cost to pick up a copy of a newspaper these days? Is it still 50 cents and maybe $1.50 on Sunday?
No, I think it's more like $3, the New York Times. And it's worth it, by the way. If you value that kind of news reporting, it's worth it.
Absolutely. And that's what we're trying to do. So functionally at $1 a month, it's 50 cents to pick up a copy of an episode of the Brave New Weedcast. And that's really enough. Like if we get 1,000 of you out there or the 10,000 of you that are tuning in to each episode to kick us $1, you know what? We'd be able to step this up and give you an episode once a week. So if you want more of the show, if you want to see more great content, if you want to keep it going, visit patreon.com/bravenewweed today and become a patron.
Hi, listeners. We are always on the lookout for great things to talk about on the Brave New Weed podcast, and we'd love to hear from you. You can always email us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com with links to articles, interesting news stories, personal accounts of things that you've done, or leads on books or products that we should know about. You can always contact us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com.
Dr. Sunil Aggarwal is one of the great proponents of medical cannabis, of legalization, of removing the stigma of cannabis. He's been at this ever since he was a graduate student. He has done a stint at the NIH. He now lives in Seattle. He practices. He runs something called the AIMS Institute, AIMS, and he really has made it his life's work to increase his knowledge and the knowledge in the world of cannabis, the plant. He has really made it his life's work to separate the myth and the misconceptions from the reality and the facts of cannabis. He is somebody I have relied on consistently for sober, straightforward information. And he's like a national living treasure as far as I'm concerned, especially when it comes to cannabis. And I think we should all know about him and keep our eyes on him and follow him whenever we can. I certainly do. So it's more than an honor to have him with us today to really host this episode of Ask Me Anything. And listeners, I'd really like to know your feelings about this. We think it's a great format. We love doing it. It's a great way of engaging, and it's a great way for us to answer the questions that come at us with authority and expertise and deep, deep knowledge. So I'll say no more. Listen to Sunil yourself and make your own judgment. And here we have our very first episode of Ask Me Anything. Hi, Sunil. Thanks for joining today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Brave New Weed.
So, are you in Seattle currently?
I am in Seattle, Washington. Yes, the Emerald City.
The rainy Emerald City. So, Sunil, just a quick intro. I know you did a stint at the National Institutes of Health. I know you're a physician, and I know you're a medical geographer. How long have you been involved studying cannabinoids and cannabis?
I would say I got really started to pique my interest about 18 years ago, and really became more seriously focused on it about 15 or 16 years ago. So
that makes you a grandfather in the field, doesn't it?
It seems that way. I mean, really, it's the field goes way, way back. The 19th century was the flowering of cannabis medicine in the West, anyway. So we're really all grandchildren, great grandchildren of our forebears. But in the recent resurgence, I guess I was kind of an early adopter, and as I was going through my own training to become a doctor. So
superb. So I'm just going to dig right in. This is an interview we're calling Ask Me Anything, and you have graciously agreed to be asked anything. And share your wisdom and tell us what you don't know if you don't know, okay? Just be honest and forthcoming. That's all we ask, all right? First question from actually on our own team, and it's about legalization and kids. And what's the recommendation as a parent? Like, you don't really want to tell your kids not to do it because they're going to do it anyway, but you want to educate them on the proper way of moderating. So what do you say to them?
It like many provinces and states and jurisdictions have dealt with this differently. In Canada, some of the provinces, they've set the legal age at 19 for purchasing cannabis. Other places, like where I live, the legal age for purchase is 21. But then there's many traditional use cultures in like Jamaica, for example, where they've introduced cannabis at much younger ages to folks. But oftentimes that's done in a ceremonial context, similar to how in many Jewish traditions, people introduce wine at a young age, and of course the Catholics do this as well. So I think the idea that this is kryptonite or lead or some kind of like fatal toxin that you have to measure in micro doses, and every little bit's going to shave off an IQ point. That's really not the proper way to think about cannabis. It's really about, in the younger scenarios, what is the context or container that it's being introduced in, and Mhm.
So I'm 14 and I'm smoking a joint and daddy sees me.
Right.
What
See,
should
we
daddy
haven't
say?
created good containers in our society yet. And, it's really a matter at this, when, young kids are finding this already now, and they know that things are changing around the laws with this. And I think we need to ask questions of young folks. Listen, where did you get that? And is it safe? Is it, is this coming from an underground market, which is not, regulated, and we don't know if there's pesticides or heavy metals or toxins or mold? Is this something that you're high THC or CBD?
No, daddy. No, daddy. Big brother gave it to me, and he got it at a dispensary.
Right. I mean, it's really kids should be told that they're young folks need to minimize their use of this, so that first they could be in legal trouble, and that could be that could impact their ability to get a job. And I think if there's a therapy, if they're finding some therapeutic value to it, that's something that should be talked about. Children do suffer from mental health and physical health ailments. I mean, there's a huge that's really kind of an underappreciated medical use, I think. I mean, we've talked a lot about cancer and epilepsy, but that's not the only maladies that children suffer from. And so it should be thought about. If there is something, it should be explored. Well, what kind of experiences are you getting out of this? Is it, and it's not like it's an automatically sinful thing that's only for adults, zero, no exceptions. We should think about the therapeutic medical scenario for children. And if that is the case, they should talk to their doctors and see if they qualify for their medical program. And if it's if it's not, if it's just sort of experimentation, that's a normal behavior in humans. And there's even some studies that were done. The American Psychological Association gave an award to a study that was done, a longitudinal study of Berkeley high school students. I think they followed them for many years beyond high school into professional lives, college, and the children, the youth who experimented with drugs of some various kinds, including marijuana, in high school. They ended up having improved sociability, tolerance, functioning, achievements, attainments compared to those who did not. And I don't know all the variables in that study, but it just goes to show you that sometimes this is normal, and in some ways potentially an accepted part of transition into adulthood. So no freaking out, just kind of honest conversation, and talking about the various legal risks, and certainly the children should know that there's many things you can do to boost that endocannabinoid system beyond using marijuana. Running, music, dancing, even of course the sex conversation needs to be part of that too, because sexual orgasm also boosts the endocannabinoid system. So it's kind of one of those difficult but necessary conversations about life that they'll have to have, and I think that conversation is going to be more common as we start to realize it's not this devil's weed, but there are some limits that our current society has on children's use and outside.
Well, I know that this question was actually prompted by a report that came out 3 weeks ago, again about teen use in the developing brain.
Yes.
So we keep reading these things.
A lot of that stuff is flawed, though. And have covered a lot of that in some other articles I've written around some of the claims that Project Sam has made around this, and it really it's to look at those epidemiological studies without acknowledging that many of the children, the youth that we track who are heavy users of marijuana are also have many other social and economic and behavioral variables that really muddy the waters of saying that that's the sole reason that they're having, problems. And
This one was talking about memory. It was talking about kids that I'm just going to be devil's advocate here.
yes,
Kids that use cannabis have I don't know, more problems with short-term memory, or was it short-term or long-term? I can't remember. But so harder time retrieving information afterwards, not while they're
so
inebriated.
yes,
But
the neurocognitive testing is usually done in those cohorts. But what I'm getting at is that when you're using cannabis in the ways that these folks are, the quantities that they are probably risking detention, legal problems, other forms of soft delinquency, you can say, and that itself is a high. It's a form of doing something, a thrill, and also breaking like laws and conventions, and that's a stress. It's its own form of challenge that comes in. And if you did anything that was against the rules over and over, um, you kind of have to live with a little bit of a chronic stress level. And what are the impacts of chronic stress on neurocognitive testing? Everybody knows this. When you've been burned out of a job, working really hard, or you're under stressful conditions, you will not remember stuff as well. You will not. You will have more irritable mood. You will have problems remembering. You'll have trouble sleeping. It's just kind of it's very hard to separate the impact of the social context of transgression. From some kind of, it's just all pharmacology and biochemistry, and that's where I'm saying that and the best example of this was done when you looked at the Dunedin study, the famous longitudinal cohort study that was done in New Zealand over many years, where they tracked children from birth onwards, and they had looked at like cannabis consumption as one of the variables, and they had said, okay, this drops some IQ points when they were exposed at a certain age compared to their controls who didn't. But then a secondary analysis was done, published in the Proceedings of the National Academies of Sciences, which is extremely very difficult to get published in journal. And those researchers showed if you controlled for socioeconomic variables that they weren't controlled with in that original analysis, that there was no difference between the groups in terms of IQ attainment. So I'm not super convinced by that. And not that, things in moderation are important as well. I'm not saying that there can't be any impacts, but I'm saying that the data is not clean when it comes to those epidemiologic studies.
God, you would think after all these years they'd figure out how to do it clean, but I guess they haven't. Let's move to another topic. Um, Here's a question that I thought was interesting. What agents, like foods or spices, do you know of that will tame THC? In other words, if you get too high, what can you take to counteract it? Some of the options are lemonade, obviously CBD, pistachios, and black pepper, like chewing on black
Right.
peppercorns. Limonene, like lemon. I guess that comes from lemonade. And then somebody also said milk is an old remedy from the barrio from up in New York. So what do you know?
Yeah, that's you've hit a lot of the things that I've seen as well. The Dr. Ethan Russo's Taming THC paper review article a couple of years ago did summarize some of the findings from traditional medicine literatures around mitigating the psychoactivity of THC, talking about things that have high terpene content, such as peppercorns, pistachios, lime, and probably more. Probably there's many more things. We just it's really not an area that's been studied. Again, it's at least in the modern setting, nobody really has looked at this that I'm aware of. I can tell you that we have really missed the boat on some of the traditional formulations of cannabis that were used in Ayurvedic medicine and traditional Indian medicine. They did combine cannabis with milk products, like in what's called a lassi, kind of a yogurt drink, cardamom, pepper, and a few other ingredients would go into that. And some of my colleagues who've done work on trying to make preparations of cannabis in conjunction with Ayurvedic recipes, or based on those ingredients, they believe, and I also have firsthand knowledge, it does seem to mitigate some of the psychoactivity in a nice way. I think there's some real value to preparing things even from the beginning, like with those ingredients, just to help keep things more even. And the fat absorption when you use milk and things like that, it may make it easier to go in and have a more even absorption. So that might be some of the reason why people take milk if they've taken an edible. I don't know if you've inhaled cannabis and then you try to drink milk, if that's going to do much for you. But it's certainly, there is an increasing the fat content in the bloodstream, and THC is protein bound in the bloodstream, so it's possible there could be an exchange there. But again, I haven't really, there hasn't been like really good pharmacology studies on this. There should be a whole cannabis harm reduction, funded field, just like we have for alcohol and tobacco harm reduction. But the government has decided to skip this whole area of public health for many decades. So
Yeah. Let's talk about CBD for a little bit, because there's a lot of questions about CBD. It's suddenly the new wonder drug.
right.
So I have a lot of questions about it. So, for example, do we need THC for medical conditions? Do we even need THC? Which ones cannot be treated by CBD alone?
There are plenty. I mean, the idea that CBD is going to, capture everything that the whole plant has done is essentially the exact same error in logic that in 1985, when the federal government fast-tracked the development of THC as a prescription pill, when they were the first federal hearings were happening at the DEA to reschedule marijuana based on a petition that was filed in 1971 or 71 or 72. It took like a decade and a half for them to start actually doing hearings. That's how much delay the government was able to do. But in that time, they gave some money to a pharmaceutical company to fast track the development of THC pills. In the soft gelatin capsule and sesame seed oil. And now we know the name Marinol. But the government argued that, okay, all the medical uses of marijuana that you guys are talking about, nausea, vomiting, pain, spasms, appetite, etc., it'll just be all done with this one chemical, and you don't really need all the other junk in there. And that really, everybody, that knows that in head-to-head studies, pure THC does not hold a candle to whole plant because of the entourage effect of the minor cannabinoids and terpenes, because of just I guess tolerability in general. Doesn't mean it doesn't work, but you have to get a lot more chemical in there, THC, to get the same effect that you would need with THC when it's in a whole plant form. So,
and people never liked Marinol. They found it dysphoric. It was sort of I took it a couple of times. It was pretty unpleasant.
Exactly. I mean, in a pinch, you can use it. I've used it myself in medical practice, in the hospital, when you don't have any other options, in elderly, dementia. It's not like I'm saying it's a lousy drug, and I'm not saying pure CBD is a lousy drug or anything, but it's just it's the same kind of fallacy that is happening now when we say that CBD will do everything for us. And it's not paying homage to the use of a whole plant, well, as they say, full spectrum medicinal plant. And I think there's something to that that's really part of the mystery or magic, or part of the pharmacological action of cannabis. Now, high CBD cannabis comes in 3 varieties. Type 1, type 2, type 3. And that's the high THC, low CBD, around equal parts CBD THC, which is type 2, and then type 3 being high CBD, low THC. And all 3 of these varieties and ratios really have their place in various forms of medical therapy and social relaxational use, and it's not like one or the other. One's going to replace the other two. That's just kind of a marketing ploy and the part of the politics of marijuana prohibition. And there's certainly,
So, please, no.
I was just going to say there are certainly cases where I would want high CBD, low THC type 3 cannabis, for certain conditions. Examples I would give are we know that schizophrenia, there's been some really nice head-to-head studies of high dose CBD compared to standard antipsychotics. These were done in Germany and in London and published in major psychiatric journals, showing that it improves many of the symptoms of schizophrenia compared to the standard antipsychotics. Ditto for social anxiety. There's been some nice research Brazilians have done with CBD, but it's a couple of 100 milligrams of CBD in those studies. And the reason, again, is I think because they're using isolate, CBD pure isolate, as opposed to a whole type 3 whole plant cannabis extract with CBD and other minor players, including THC. So it's
So when you take the other cannabinoids and terpenes out, the potency of the CBD itself
drops,
changes.
Exactly. You got to get more in there to get the same bang, because it doesn't have its entourage to help make the make it more effective. It's just like it's just like it's kind of the single molecule fallacy that if it's really just CBD, everything else is just junk. And that's the same thing the DEA was saying in '85 about THC. So that's what the analogy I'm drawing.
So that leads to the next question, which is what's the difference in efficacy of hemp-derived full spectrum CBD versus marijuana-derived full spectrum?
Yes, that's such a complicated, confusing issue, and it
These are supposed to be easy questions, Sunil.
Well, I'll just simply put, the distinction that we have legally placed on hemp and marijuana is really a political legal one. It's not really based on the botany and chemistry of cannabis. Hemp is really the oldest English name for cannabis, but because in Europe, most of the cannabis that they knew before they went and started colonizing and traveling the world was more of the type 3 cannabis, high CBD, low THC. They tended to really see the hemp as a strong fiber, a good source of cellulose, certainly as a medicine too. The seeds and the roots and some of the flowers, but nobody was talking about communing with God or, having this amazing sudden relief of pain, because they really didn't they didn't know, at least until exchange began, that there was more to it. So they applied that word hemp to cannabis when they'd still discovered it in India, calling it Indian hemp, and that was more high THC cannabis. There was probably CBD there too, but there was more type 1, type 2 cannabis there. And so now that we have, went ahead and prohibited marijuana that we did in the 30s, all of this hemp that was growing here, that was part of the kind of fiber cordage industrial use, we sort of said, okay, that's all, we're going to call that all hemp, and all this other stuff we'll call marijuana, not realizing that the two really are really just different types of the same plant. So now that we have this opening where hemp, the non-THC containing cannabis, is more liberally regulated. People are deriving cannabis CBD from strains that qualify as hemp based on their THC content. Now, not all the strains that they use that with are really well bred for high resin production, which is where the cannabinoids are made. So they have to, that's where the question comes down. Are you using a cannabis variety, hemp derived, that's really well adapted to making a lot of resin? Or is it something that's really kind of used mainly for its stalk and fiber, thick cellulose, and that's where a lot of the genes of the plant are. And really, the flower resin production is is a smaller player in its expression, its phenotype, and that's where you sometimes get run into problems because people using those varieties, they don't tend to have as much terpene content. You end up having to use a lot more flour to yield a smaller quantity of CBD, which raises the risk of heavy metal and other types of toxins, that because cannabis is an excellent bioaccumulator from the soil. And so if that wasn't grown in clean soil, all of those things can accumulate. So it needs to be well tested. And a lot of times people don't spend the money on the heavy metal testing for that stuff. So it's better if you are using cannabis that may be high CBD and may qualify as hemp, like according to the State Department of Agriculture of Colorado or Oregon, but really it's coming from strains that are bred for flower production, like Canna Sue, Cannatonic, Harlequin, these types of varieties that we know are really resin rich, and that's kind of the hemp derived. That's still being called hemp derived CBD because legally, politically, it falls under the definition of hemp in that state. So that's why it gets confusing because of these two.
Yeah, that's a really hard one to navigate, isn't it? I mean, I get CBD from Vermont from strains that were bred in Colorado. I have no idea what the name of the strains are. I think it works quite well, but I have no way of verifying, and there is no way of verifying for most of us as consumers.
Yes, and I work with a medical cannabis educator now here in Seattle named Mary Brown. She has a company called SMJ Consulting, and she's done a lot of the groundwork to help me understand doing third-party testing and to let consumers know and patients, what are good sources, because it's a really good idea if you can find good, clean sources, because it's going to be a lot cheaper than the CBD if you're buying it from the medical markets in the states that are heavily taxed. And the other thing is the dosage. To really break through the single-digit CBD dosing per day and into the 25, 30, 50, even 100 milligrams a day, you really need sources from these industrial hemp varieties that are, good quality, because you can't find those doses in the medical markets because of the taxation.
Well, that raises here's another question that banks off of that. Given that there's so much less regulation and costs for security in a national legal market and tax deductions and banking, why is CBD priced as high or higher than CHC?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not an economist, but that is these market. Listen, our whole industry. I mean, if you think about health, cannabis touches on our healthcare system and its screwed up pricing schema. I mean, look at how weirdly priced health services are. It has nothing to do with demand or need or the original cost. And then, of course, the drug policies and the cost of, cost of a commodity that's underground has everything to do with how much crackdown is going on and how much people are willing to pay.
Oh, come on, Sunil. There's not that much crackdown going down.
No, that's true. Well,
I mean,
if you're in Ohio, there is. I mean, they pulled the CBD off the shelf. Texas, several times they've had press conferences where the police of, I think it was Dallas or Austin, they went and pulled it off the shelves. It also happened in Manhattan, where you're at. There was kind of a sweep up that happened. So I wouldn't say that it's.
Not pulling off the shelves. Look, you can go in New York, at least in a health food store, and buy CBD, and it can be $90 for an ounce or two with a variable concentration that sometimes isn't even marked on the label, right?
That's all. People are making a quick buck, but the other, you should also know the merchant serve. If you're going to run your credit card with that purchase, because of the issues with IRS. Section 280E, which limits banking ability to deduct business expenses that are attached to Schedule 1 purchases. And because of the ongoing, federal inability to, one agency says one thing, Department of Agriculture will say one thing, but the Internal Revenue Service says something else, and the DEA says something entirely. I mean, it is such a confusing situation at the federal level, but of course, the tax man is that the buck stops here agency, so you can't really do anything, but you really can't do anything but kind of say, well, I better separate that these purchases just in case the IRS comes after me and says I owe all this in back taxes. So there are companies.
I still don't understand why that bottle costs $90. I mean,
I know
it still doesn't make sense to me.
The whole point of that is that the merchant servicing for those the companies that are handling CBD transactions, it's a lot higher cut they take percentage wise. It's under 10%, but it's not 2% or 3%. I've heard like pretty high percentages that the retailers have to pay. Just to even run the money through to a legal banking scenario. So that's one issue. There is a demand and supply issue. I think people right now the supply is so low, at least in the medical markets, and people are trying to kind of also capitalize on the fad of CBD, like the hype in the marketing. So I think the price point is really people are trying to find. And now look what's just happened. The FDA has approved a CBD 100 milligrams per milliliter cannabis product, which is the Epidiolex, FDA approved CBD tincture. And I can't remember a price per bottle, but it's something like 400 or 500 or some ridiculous hundreds of dollars.
Just out.
And so, how many different ways are we going to try to game the system, to see what people are willing to pay? And that's why, I really have a lot of hope in these American-grown CBD industrial hemp agriculture developments, because that's going to bring the price down. Because there's a lot more people growing, there's a lot lower barrier to entry, and they will compete with this FDA extremely expensive CBD.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Here's another question. Let's get off the CBD topic. A lot of vapor that we get in vaporizers is thinned with PG, propylene glycol. And the question is, does this mean that vaporizing will be causing all sorts of lung issues in a few years? I mean, it's basically PG is used in antifreeze, I believe, correct?
Antifreeze agents, and there's the issue of the heating of that solvent, and it makes a chemical called acetyl, and it has been known to cause a condition in microwave popcorn factory workers called popcorn lung, and that's kind of the fibrotic disease now. The dose is the poison when it comes to toxicity, occupational toxicity exposures and consumer exposures. And this is why we have certain tolerable, acceptable limits of known carcinogens, and not that they're always well set, but that's the kind of question. We don't really know what that minimum level of exposure is. I really, all of the evidence on the lung effects of that chemical are from the occupational studies that I was mentioning. So I'm a little bit, it's hard to say. I think it should be avoided. And plenty of manufacturers have gotten hip to that. But again, in a zero regulated space, this is a risk. And so people need to make sure there's no glycol anything excipients in their vapor concentrate cartridges or juices. So
would you say that smoking is, if you are in an unregulated place, that smoking is more reliably safe than vaporization?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in my state, there are people label these vapors now saying we do not use propylene glycol or PEG or any of these in their their products. So if you don't live in a place where that's even known, it's a buyer beware. You really have to know what's in it. You can take these things for solvent testing. People, labs are around like that, and you should insist that if that's available. Yeah, but it's an underground market, and you have flour, and that's it. Not that flour is free of invisible, risks. There's this eagle eye 20 or some name for mycobutanol pesticide that has been used in cannabis production indoors to prevent mite infestation or whatever. And when you heat that, you make cyanide. And there's again, I don't know if what the minimum tolerable dose of cyanide is, but because of its long-standing role in occult poisoning and murder, people are really scared of any cyanide, and it's not something I would want to mess around with. So pesticide is an issue in the flower. So I have to say, there's really no getting around regulated, knowledgeable consumption. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Vapor or flower, you just need to know your sources.
Another question is: will drops/oils / tinctures be going the way of the dodo bird, given the inventions of things like breath strips, which are easily measured, easily dosed?
Let's see. Drops and tinctures are, such an old way to do plant medicine, and they are still widely used in many other botanical medicines. From St. John's Wort or Golden Seal or this and that. It's been around forever, and I don't think it's going anywhere. Certainly, the buccal absorption technologies, chewing gums, and breath strips offer a comfortable and easily packaged alternative. But just look at. I mean, it just depends on what you're talking about, Joe, because opioids, we've been using them forever, and I have, fentanyl comes in lollipops, and we have patches, but we also use liquid morphine. And so it really all depends on, in the medical setting, just like whatever is going to be on the formulary and affordable with the consumer who's trying to use these as wellness products. I think they might tend to use the breath strip more easily, but if they're trying to titrate up a dose of CBD or even THC CBD, a tincture, there's nothing beats a tincture because of the way that you can really go to drop by drop level.
They just get expensive. I mean, that's I think that was the basis of that question. It's like they just get expensive.
Yeah, I mean,
compared to everything
pricing
else.
is the excise taxes. I mean, look in your own state of New York, it is an extremely the pricing scheme was never designed to be affordable to the most to a budget where you're spending, let's say, $50 or $100 a month on healthcare costs for plant drugs. It's not done like that. It's based on, well, how much can we rip off of you? It's the price per this, the dosing is really. I don't think that. Do you really think the breath strips are cheaper? If you.
Oh no, I'm sure the price of development is factored into the price. But let me just move to a quick other question on this idea. It says the cheapest CBD product is 5 cents a milligram, which, if you're using the average dose of 20 milligrams, is $1 a pill. And if you're using it 2 or 3 times a day, that comes out to $150 a month, which is really not that
That's
affordable for a lot of people. So why is no one addressing the cost? It's a super narrow range of affordability. Is it just too early? I mean, as a medical cannabis person, I'm very concerned about this because if we want to ever popularize this, it's way out of line with almost everything else, don't you think?
Yes, of course, and it's part of the this comes with creating markets that are oligopolies and monopolies. This is how price fixing happens, and we created scenarios that if you look at all these state programs, Florida, Ohio, even New York, many scenarios, it's like a couple of people vying for a couple of licenses that create kind of this price fixing. But if you look at programs like Oklahoma that's just rolled out in June, and now they have tens of thousands of registered patients, and they issued thousands of licenses for production, growing, dispensing, you're going to get a totally different pricing at the end of the day. And that's kind of I think it's really a factor of the democratization of production and preparation. And in Washington State, we don't have any home grow allowance for anybody, even though we're like a legal marijuana state. We're one of the only ones that does it like that. And this is part of one of the complaints that patients have, and consumers who want to have some. It's just too expensive to buy it. The excise taxes are so high. So we one of the things that we do is we educate patients here that you can buy raw flour, put it in a magic butter machine, and really one or two steps end up with, a couple of months supply of, let's say, coconut oil infused capsules that's way cheaper, 50-60% cheaper than what you could do if you tried to buy it on the open market. That's the kind of thing that people, of course, they've got to be invested in it enough to try something like that. But those are the only ways to skirt that.
Yeah, it's definitely work, but it isn't that hard to do at the end of the day.
No, people do. People make home products all the time. They just need to have access to bulk flour, and the price of that, I think, is hopefully going to stay lower, and that's one opening. And then, of course, opening up the markets to these programs, and I think it's going to happen. I mean, this farm bill is going to really change the democratization of cannabis production in the U.S.
Good. I like to hear one optimistic note. CBD and skin. Bobbi Brown is coming out with a new line of CBD cosmetics.
Oh, is he?
Should we be skeptical? Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Should we be skeptical? And how much is a therapeutic dose versus a cosmetic-only dose that really will have a very different effect? So those are two questions. Should we be skeptical? And really, I mean, some people are claiming that CBD reduces wrinkles. Give us the skinny.
I don't know anything about the wrinkles, but there's tons of dermatological research on topical application of cannabinoids going back many years now. There's no doubt about it that, like, for example, the first study that really helped me to solidify this in my mind was a German study on allergic contact dermatitis that was done in rats, where they gave them a nickel earring, and they developed this rash. And then they made a THC cream. It went away. And then they bred rats that didn't have CB1 receptors and did it to them again, and it didn't work when they applied it to them. So we know that cannabinoid receptors in the skin respond to inflammation and dermatitis when you apply cannabis creams onto them topically. So that's a great area. There's also there's been some nice case reports of really severe dermatological conditions where you get like bullae, like it's like some rare bad dermatological condition. Stanford researchers, rubbed some topical cannabinoids they got from the artisanal market, and were able to treat a child who had essentially burns on the skin. Many burn patients also talk about the use of topical cannabinoids to help them reduce the risk of contractures that happen after you heal from the scars of a burn. So there's clearly a medical effect in terms of inflammation, suppleness, the immune responses like eczema, and of course the contact dermatitis I was mentioning. That's real, and I think people really are. Rick Simpson, the very famous, guy who he had skin cancer of some kind, and he found that he was able to rub some cannabis on his, I think they were basal cell carcinomas, and they were able to, go away. And there's some nice reasons to believe even in melanoma there would be some role. Now, some of that stuff you probably have to get systemic cannabinoids, but we don't really know yet. And I think it's it's still early. Now, hemp seed oil has been used forever for skin health. It's in tons of beauty products. There's a chemical in hemp seed oil called gamma linoleic acid, GLA, which the cosmetic industry really likes because it has some benefits in terms of skin health. So I wouldn't be surprised that if you combine hemp seed oil and some cannabinoids, maybe there'll be some nice products. I don't know if it'll make you look younger, but it certainly could be seen as a way to promote skin health. CBD
dose we should be looking for?
dose, yeah, that's hard to say right now. I don't know. I don't think we know. You said I could say I don't know on some of these questions, so I really don't know. We do know that if you're trying to get, I have read some research that CBD absorbs better into the skin than THC does.
Yeah, Meshulam said that.
Meshulam said that. Okay, good. Yeah. So the question is how much will that get systemic versus how much will just stay in the dermis? I don't really know, but it seems like with skin applications, you really you can kind of tell right away. You can titrate your dose pretty easily. Maybe it's a couple of milligrams. I don't know, but.
I want to ask you about, as we're coming to the end here, I want to ask 2 more quick questions. Fibromyalgia and either CBD or medical cannabis efficacy. Is there any evidence that this disease, which is linked to, I don't even know what it is, but I don't think anybody knows what it is. It's linked to swelling, pressure, and sensitivity to pain. Is there any evidence that it's hyperreactive to cannabis medication?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's like tons of evidence. There was a global survey of fibromyalgia patients. It was really amazing. I can't remember how many thousands of patients participated in it, but just looking at a group of all comers, they say cannabinoids were the best category that had the least risk of side effects and the most chance for benefits. And they compared it to all the standard FDA-approved treatments for fibromyalgia. Gabapentin, Lyrica, tricyclic antidepressants, what have you. There's no doubt that cannabis has a role in the improvement of the quality of life of fibromyalgia patients. Dr. Mark Ware in Canada did studies with a kind of chemical cousin of THC called nabilone that they have there. Dosing that at night for fibromyalgia patients improves their sleep, their energy levels the following day. Cannabinoid pharmacology is a breakthrough in fibromyalgia, well-being. And if you don't know it, and you have this condition, you're missing a huge potential therapy. Dr. Russo says that probably there's some dysregulation in the endocannabinoid system that is part of the underlying reason why they have this altered pain sensitivity. And so cannabis is only one way to boost your endocannabinoid system. Electrical acupuncture, exercise, singing and music, osteopathic manipulative therapy, and sexual orgasm are all other demonstrated ways to boost your endocannabinoid system. Probably.
One thing I love is that you mentioned sexual orgasm several times. It's very refreshing. Julie Holland, we just interviewed her, and she was talking a lot about oxytocin and the power of it. And I think you're seconding her.
Yes, exactly. Although the study that showed the sexual orgasm was a German study where it was self-pleasuring. That's not the only way to orgasm.
Yes, we know that. Thank you, Dr. Aggarwal, for letting us know that. Hey, listen, last question here. This is about the acids, THCV, CBDA, but this one is specific to THCV, and it says, can THCV really help induce weight loss? And if it can you hurry up and write the patent and include me in it?
Okay, first of all, let me clarify one thing. The question's premise. The THCV is not an acid cannabinoid. It's a minor cannabinoid, tetrahydrocannabinol. It's an isopropyl group. It's a certain chemical change. Acids are a different.
For people who are listening to this, the acids are found on the leaf before it's burned.
That's right.
Am I correct?
The acids are like, the most prevalent acids in cannabis are THC acid and CBD acid, which are the non-decarboxylated forms, and those are really amazing. Underutilized, and I think mixing fractions of that stuff with the decarboxylated is going to be, I think, a huge breakthrough. They have great activity in autoimmune diseases, and I think in COX-2 inhibition, which is like a good anti-inflammatory. Now, we're
going to have to come to that one. Hold that thought for a second. But THCV is a so-called minor cannabinoid, which occurs when you're heating the plant. Am I correct?
No, it's THCV you can heat, and I don't know if it occurs in the decarboxylated form or if it's in the THCV acid, THCVA, and then when you heat it, it might become THCV. But THCV has been studied for diabetes, and as you said, for weight loss. I don't know if it's gonna, I haven't seen any like human evidence that it's gonna help people's keep weight off. But I think the endocannabinoid system is critical in metabolism. So if it certainly is promising, and I think we're going to need to do more research. Also, the other one is CBDV. THCV and CBDV are kind of CBDV is being studied for autism disorders, and I think Tourette's and a bunch of other conditions. And it's cannabis is such a factory of different fascinating underutilized compounds, and I really I think the science and medical research is not keeping up with the public interest, and that's a problem. But thankfully, it's very safe. So, your experimentation is generally, not going to harm you.
Sunil, I can't thank you enough for doing this. How can people learn more about you and your work?
I've got a new institute set up called the AIMS Institute. www.aimsinstitute.net is where you can find my clinic. And I'm working with a great team. We're doing psychotherapy, naturopathic care, advanced palliative care and rehabilitation. We're doing ketamine therapy. We're doing cannabis education, psychotherapy, you name it. So it's a great project, and we do teleeducation as well. So, folks can connect with us, and we can help you in your health goals. And then I also have a cannabinologist.org website where I've put some of my articles, and it's got more scholarly stuff if you want to geek out.
So it's AIMS, AMES dot...
AIMS, AIMS, like AIMS, AIMS Institute.
Very good. And the other is the Cannabinologist, yes?
.org, exactly. Yeah, I know these are long names, but I've had cannabinologists for a number of years now, and I think it's been helpful to have a repository of information. And there's many other good sources, but that's my source. So
I give you a lot of credit for doing it. I think you're the way of the future, and I hope to talk to you again in the near future. Thanks so much, Sunil Aggarwal.
It's been my pleasure, Joe. Take care now.
You can like and follow the Brave New Weed podcast on all the best social media platforms. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed, or on Twitter @bravenewweed, or Instagram @bravenewweed.
Thank you, Sunil. What a great guy. And he also seemingly never sleeps. He testifies before courts. He is a relentless researcher, and he just posted on Twitter a new piece that he wrote called Cannabis Fear Deconditioning, an autobiological marijuana memoir of a South Asian/Oklahoman physician scientist. And that would be him. Thank you again, Sunil, and thanks again for spending time with us on the Brave New Weed podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.